Verstappen is one of the drivers that isn't happy with the recent actions by the governing body, and things have gotten to the extent that the two-time world champion is threatening to leave the sport prematurely due to the weird directions that it's taking. But even with this in mind, Verstappen has been blasted by many experts for his words, and what he had to say about the end of the Australian GP has kept everyone on the edge of their seats.
I also don't really want to make it a big thing, but when the rules are written like that, I thought they were going to be respected, but it's okay. I mean, I know, like I said, I was quite careful as well on lap 1. I probably could have defended a bit better, but that's how it goes sometimes.
Max Verstappen won his second GP of the 2023 season, and this one could have ended horribly wrong for him had Hamilton had more luck during the last restart of the race that happened in the closing stages of the Melbourne GP. But according to Verstappen, what Hamilton did during turn 3 in lap 1, as the 7-time world champion got ahead of his biggest nemesis from the 2021 season, was definitely wrong. And the Dutchman didn't see a point in fighting when he knew that the superiority of his car would definitely prevail and he would win the race. But Verstappen has smashed the FIA for their actions towards the red flag at the closing stages of the race, saying that the governing body made a very unnecessary mess. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and if you want to see what Verstappen said about the governing body in terms of leaving the sport due to the constant changes, make sure to stay tuned with us. Verstappen isn't a huge fan of the changes in the sport, and one of the things that he spoke about is the sprint format. Now, this is something that the FIA wants to expand even further, and rest assured that the two-time world champion will have a huge say against that. Verstappen being angry or disappointed with certain decisions being made by the FIA isn't something new, but him saying that he'd retire earlier if the sprint format keeps expanding has definitely brought some attention to the grid. Apart from the sprint format, the Dutchman isn't a huge fan of the street circuits that keep popping up on the calendar more and more frequently, but that's a topic for another video. Now we're going to talk about Verstappen's take on the sprint format, which saw its introduction in the 2021 season and is more and more accepted by the FIA as a proper way to introduce more entertainment to the sport. When talking about this, Verstappen feels like the DNA of the sport is being stripped away, as he went on to add, "I don't find that it's the DNA of F1 to do these kind of sprint races. F1 is about getting the most out of it in qualifying and then having an amazing Sunday. That's the DNA of the sport, and I don't understand why we should change that, because I think the action's been good, and how do we get even more action is about getting the cost closer, getting more teams able to fight for the win." But this is just the first part of his statement, and according to the Dutchman, if the sport keeps adding more stuff to keep everyone at home and the fans on the track entertained, then it's not worth it for him to remain here for a long time. When we're going to do all that kind of stuff, the weekend becomes even more intense, and we're already doing so many races. I think that's not the right way to go about it. I understand they want to have excitement, but then I think maybe it's better to just reduce the weekend, only race and Saturday and Sunday to make those 2 days exciting. Because we're heading into seasons where you have at one point 24 or 25 races. If you then start adding even more stuff, it's not worth it for me. I'm not enjoying that. For me, a sprint race is all about surviving, it's not about racing. And keep in mind that Verstappen is constantly involved in all kinds of controversies with the FIA, as the latest one was the restart of the Australian GP and the position of his tyres on the white stripes. While everyone wanted Verstappen to be treated the same way as Alonso and Ocon were treated previously, with 5 seconds being added to his name, it turned out that the position of his tyres were pure perfection, and it didn't go over the entire white line, which isn't enough for him to get penalised. But can Verstappen really retire if all things don't go his way? Yes, he is a generational talent, and he does have speed that not many drivers can brag about. But is this the kind of attitude you want to bring to every race for your team? As Horner said, the hardest thing in the Formula 1 world would probably be having Verstappen as your teammate, and it's inevitable that the greatness he's brought to the team starting from 2021 onward is unmatchable. Martin Brundle, on the other hand, believes that the moves Verstappen is making currently are just for fame and to state his displeasure. as there's no way that he would retire while still at the peak of his career. Keep in mind that the engine freeze that is taking place until the beginning of the 2026 season practically means that the other teams will have little to no chance of catching up to the Austrian team. So we have to ask a logical question at this point. Why would Verstappen want to leave when everything is going in his favour? When asked about Verstappen's takes, Brundle added, "I'd be surprised if he leaves the sport. But if he doesn't want to drive it, there are a million other people who do want to drive that Red Bull." I think what he's trying to say is, using pleasant words, don't mess around too much. Let's just evolve and massage this along. Don't keep changing the ground rules. I get his point on that, but I don't really see why that would make him stop. But if there is one thing that Brundle agrees with Verstappen on, it's the fact that the current format of the sport is great, and there is practically no need to constantly invent new things when the sport is doing well exactly as it is now. Sure, the popularity grows and the fans want to watch interesting situations happen. However, it shouldn't come at the expense of the integrity of the sport being questioned. This is something that Verstappen has taken a cheap shot at the FIA for as well, as he joined Wolff and Norris in the belief that the red flags are being brought just to bring more entertainment to the sport with the race restarts. While it's good for the ones that are trailing behind, it's definitely a killer outcome for the race leaders and those who've been able to build a solid lead and win some quality points ahead. Something that doesn't go in Verstappen's favour, as he's mostly the one who leads the pack in front. And even with the current dominance of the RB19, it seems like Verstappen and Perez aren't driving the wheels off the car, as was recently accused by George Russell. The Briton said that Red Bull is a team that doesn't need to bring 100% of their car to the following weekend, mostly because this way they're avoiding a potential regulation change by the FIA to make racing more equal. But Verstappen's take was very interesting, as he doubts that the FIA can do anything to take away the power that his team is manifesting this season. This is yet another jab at the governing body, as the Dutchman practically admitted that there is no living force out there, other than himself, that can make him lose a race. When talking about this matter, he added, I think anyway, there's nothing really they can do." Horner went on to compliment his statement as he added, "That's very generous of him, Russell's theory. His team would know too well about those kinds of advantages. There's always an element of managing that goes on in any race, because it was a one-stop race and a very early one-stop race. Of course, there was an element of time management going on, and you could see how Perez wasn't hanging about. He wasn't cruising around or holding back 7/10 of a lap because he didn't want to show it. The grid was certainly a little bit closer here." All in all, we can conclude that Verstappen is a driver that doesn't hold back when it comes to bashing the FIA, and the fact that the governing body announced that they're planning to introduce a 30-race calendar in the near future goes on to show that this may displease the Dutchman yet again in the near future. With everything that is going on between him and his teammate, and between him and the FIA, is there a legitimate chance that he could fall back from the sport? Or will he continue to rub things in the governing body's faces just to show that he and his team are invincible? Let us know in the comments down below.